I'm really excited to share this interaction that Jesus is going to have with the person we're going to talk about today. No spoilers, but first I am going to tell you a little bit about the day that my baby was born. So nothing like a good labor story to wake us up. I won't tell the whole thing. But basically, if you know me, you know that I am at high risk of being overprotective, okay? If anyone's going to be a helicopter mom, it's me. I'm already working on it. I hope that by the time that he knows what I'm doing, that I don't come across that way to him. But I just am very, very protective. I'm pretty high control. And anyways, I was praying throughout the pregnancy, just this prayer, God, help me to surrender control, help me to surrender control. So then the day of the birth comes, and needless to say, it just doesn't go as planned. And it was kind of a chaotic disaster a little bit, which is not sugarcoating it. It was a chaotic disaster. And the long story short is that as soon as the baby is born, I needed to be tranquilized, and I was unconscious for the first 3 hours of the baby's life, okay? So I wake up 3 hours later, and all of the chaos has left the room, and sweet Pedro's standing there, and it's just him and my little baby. And for the first 3 hours of his life, I just literally was laying there like a limp noodle. Okay, so he gets some tests done that day, and remember, he's 0 days old. And his bilirubins, which is a jaundiced term, he had jaundice. Bilirubins to me sounded like, you might as well have been saying goblins or something ridiculous, but that's a real thing. You can Google it, bilirubins. He didn't have enough, and so he needed to go into this little incubator thing with this UV light, okay? Now, I, who am overprotective and desperately want to control and want to be close to my baby that just came out of me, was distraught over this, and I knew that that's what he needed. I knew that was the best thing for him, and I also knew that it was pretty normal. Like, objectively, I can tell you, yeah, any baby that's born a little bit early, probably they're going to need to go under the lights. Like, I know that, okay? But I had just given birth, and I've been awake for like 30 hours, minus this little stint, and I was just freaking out. And so for that, the first day of his life, for a full 24 hours, I couldn't hold him. He had to be in this little incubator thing under this UV light for his own good so that he could develop more bilirubins. And I remember standing over the side of that thing. I couldn't sleep. I was asking Pedro how long I went without sleep during that time, and we don't know, but it was somewhere up to like 50 hours, maybe 60. I just couldn't leave his side, and I had never in my life felt that desperate before. Just desperate that God would heal him, that he would come through, also just that God would comfort him, because I couldn't. And that was the one thing that instinctively I knew I was supposed to do. I was supposed to be there for the baby that had just come out, and I couldn't be. And so I was just standing there weeping, and I knew objectively what was going on. I knew, but my feelings were, boy, I was desperate that God heal that little tiny baby and comfort him when I couldn't. I never felt that helpless before, or that invested in another person. And so today, we're going to read a true story of Jesus interacting with a desperate mother, a mom whose child has been possessed by an evil spirit, and she is helpless to help her baby and desperate, and she's going to come to Jesus. And he's going to interact with her in a way that we wouldn't expect him to. So, first, a little bit of context. Boy, this is really low. Don't mind me. Okay, there's a map that we're going to put on the screen. Everyone look at the map and not what I'm doing. Okay, so geography and scripture, we usually just roll right past, but this is really important understanding this story. Okay, so do you see that, there's the Sea of Galilee. It looks like a blue dot right in the center of that land. You see it? You see it? Okay, great. So on your left is where Jesus starts this story. He's right on the left side of the Sea of Galilee, of that little blue lake area, okay? He's on the left, and he is talking to the Pharisees. And remember from last week, who were the Pharisees? Jewish religious leaders, bad, contentious relationship with Jesus, okay? Religious leaders, and he is having not a good interaction with them. They're being pretty typical to who they are and argumentative and mean to Jesus. Okay, so he's going to start the story there, and then he's going to travel up to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Sidon or Sidon? And that, yeah, thank you. No, up, you see where it says Phoenicia? Phoenicia. Well, he's going to be up, okay, to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So, that in that little area, after he's left by the side of the Sea of Galilee, he's going to go up, and then this is where he's going to have this interaction with this desperate mom. Okay, so just before we get there, before we read this story, it's important that we all know when Jesus is going to refer to a group of people as the children of God. And who does he mean by that? The Jews, the children of God. In other words, the people that he was just with on the side of the Sea of Galilee, those Pharisees, the children of God, the people of Israel. So that's who he's talking about. Okay, and now we're going to read this story, and I have it on the screen for you. And it's in Matthew chapter 15. Sorry if that's little. It's Matthew chapter 15, starting in verse 21. And I want you to pay really close attention to Jesus' response to anything that Jesus does. I want you to really flag that in your mind. Okay. Jesus went away from there and withdrew into the region of the Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he did not answer her with even a word. His disciples came up and urged him, saying, "Send her away, because she keeps shouting at us." But he answered and said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and began to bow down before him, saying, "Lord, help me." Yet he answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." And she said, "Yes, Lord, but please help. For even the dogs feed on the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed at once. So, just want to hear from a couple of you. What stands out to you about his reaction? Is this what you would have expected from him? Called her a dog. Probably not what we'd expect. Anything? Called her a dog after just completely ignoring her. Is this what you would expect from the Jesus in your mind? Probably not. And this is who he was. I'm going to read the same scripture, but from Mark, the same story, but from a different author, another guy who was there. So it says, Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Lord," she replied, "even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter." Okay, do you notice any differences, any similarities? Yeah? What differences do you see, for instance? Yeah, we learn from Mark's version of this story that he was trying to withdraw and get some rest after his interaction with the Pharisees. Yeah, he was trying to get away from the Jews, from the children of God, and that's why he goes up here. Yeah, what else do you notice? There aren't disciples mentioned in Mark, right? Yeah. So it's helpful to have both versions, because if you're just reading Mark, you wouldn't know Were the disciples there? Reading both versions really helps us. Anything else? Yeah, a very helpful distinction. Christian said in Mark, we learned that he intends to feed the dogs at some point. Anything else? Do you notice? Oh. Yes. In Matthew, he calls her a Canaanite. In Mark, she is called a Greek. Who was the author of Matthew writing to? Jews. Who's the Jews' outsider, their long-standing enemy, those people? The Canaanites. And who's Mark writing to? Romans. He's writing to the Romans. That's Luke. Luke writes to the Greeks. Mark is writing to the Romans, and who would be the outsider for the Romans? The Greeks. The Syrian Phoenicians. Yes, absolutely. So in both of these stories, we see that it's important, it's flagged for us that, Jesus is talking to an outsider here. He is not talking to the person who is a child of Israel. He's talking to an outsider here. So all that's important to keep in mind, and I'm going to get into the meat of my stuff here. So there are so many things I think that we can learn about the way that Jesus interacted with people from this story. And I'm only going to focus on 3, and that's for time's sake. But I'd encourage you to go read through this and think through it more on your own. So the first thing, and I have really basic slides just to help us follow along. First thing we can learn about how Jesus interacted with people is that he wasn't primarily concerned with people's feelings. He wasn't primarily concerned with people's feelings. So in our culture, for the most part, sensitivity to other people's feelings is held in really high esteem. And we love the Jesus who has compassion for the leper and reaches out his hand to provide him comfort. We love the Jesus who empathizes with the regretful prostitute and gently restores her dignity. And we have a harder time accepting the same Jesus who ignores the desperate mother pleading for her little girl. Jesus wasn't primarily concerned with people's feelings. He was primarily concerned with being obedient to his Father. And he tells his disciples as much when he explains to them, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. He was on God's orders, God's agenda. He was trying to move people onto God's agenda, regardless of whether or not that would make him friends. So he ignored her because, as best he could tell, that wasn't his directive from God. She wasn't a Jew. And can you imagine if this happened today? If some weeping mother walked into the back of this room and she was pleading that, her kid was outside and had just choked on something and we all just looked at her. Can you imagine if I was standing here as a pastor and did nothing? You would rightly revolt. You would kick me out of this church. No, it's just absolutely ridiculous that we would ignore her. And then he basically implies that her people aren't as important as the children of Israel. Now, the word dog wouldn't have sounded as strong to her as it does to our ears. It just wouldn't have been as horribly offensive as it is to us. But it still would have undeniably connoted to her that her people were less important or not a priority in that moment for what he was trying to do on earth. So I just want you to try to put yourself in her shoes for a second. And if we're honest about how we would feel if we were her, most of us would find his behavior here highly offensive. It just wouldn't sit right with us. You're telling me that the one person who has the ability to help won't even give me the time of day, and then when he does, he's going to tell me that? It would be really offensive to us. The Oxford Dictionary defines offensive It's an adjective that is causing someone to feel deeply hurt, upset, or angry. Even she, desperate though she was, needed to get on board with what the Father was doing. That was the Father's way of restoring the world to right relationship with him, and even she needed to get on God's agenda. And so then at the end of this interaction, he ends up healing her daughter. And even this would have been offensive to who? The Jews. Even in his compassion to the outsider, he was offensive to somebody. Everything that he did made somebody mad. Remember the context here, she was an outsider. Think about how the Jewish people that surrounded Jesus reacted when he gave traitors or outsiders the time of day. How dare he? He's supposed to be our Messiah, not theirs. Imagine John canceling on you over and over again to hang out with someone who had betrayed you or hurt you in the past. Man, what the heck? Really? That guy? Jesus regularly caused people to feel deeply hurt, upset, and angry. Jesus wasn't primarily concerned with people's feelings. He was primarily concerned with being obedient to his Father. So what? Jesus wasn't at all concerned with making sure people liked him. His chief aim was not to be nice. That's very different from our culture. He did not come to bring peace, but a sword. You see echoes of this in his other interactions with people. Think about the rich young ruler who was like a pretty decent guy, and he goes up to Jesus and he's like, hey, I'd love to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, but first you have to go sell everything you own and then you can come follow me. And so the guy went away sad because he had great wealth. Or think about the time that he rebuked Peter and called him Satan, his best friend. Probably hurt Peter's feelings, no? Think about the time that there was that young man who wanted to follow Jesus, but his father was dying, and Jesus said, first, let the dead bury their own dead, but you come follow me. Can you imagine hearing that from Jesus? Think about how he speaks to the Pharisees. He was not always nice, and he wasn't concerned primarily with people's feelings. And Paul, who's trying to be like Jesus, echoes this later in his letter to the Galatians, and he writes, am I not trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And I don't want to misrepresent Jesus here because he is so full of compassion. And there were times when obedience to the Father looked a lot more empathetic. Don't get me wrong. Jesus really cares about how you feel, but he cares a great deal more about what God is trying to do in and through you. That's what he's going to focus on. Even in his rebuke, there is love. It's just who he is. Everything he does comes from that place for Jesus. It was love that drove him to upturn the money changers' tables. Love that drove him to rebuke the Pharisees. He is compassionate, but he's on mission. So some practicals here, it's going to feel like I'm dangling this in a bad place for Jesus, but it'll get better throughout the sermon. Practicals, how should we strive to be like him? Well, be super offensive. No, just kidding. Don't do that. Care more about obedience to God than making people like you. Whatever it is that you think God wants you to do, you do that. Jesus said, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. This is why the world hates you. Strive to get the people in your life onto God's agenda, even if they hate you for it. Be very wary if you fit into the world like a glove. You are not on God's agenda if that's the case. Be very careful to remove the log from your own eye before you even consider addressing the speck in someone else's. And this doesn't mean to just not address someone else's speck. It just means that you need to take yours seriously so that you can come to your brother or your sister or your child or your parent or whomever you're talking to from a place of great humility. And quickly, before moving on to the next point, I just want to honor her response here. You'll notice she didn't get offended. Jesus, I think, arguably was kind of offensive in that moment, no? And she didn't respond in an offended way. She wasn't entitled to his help. She didn't say, "How dare you ignore me? How dare you tell me no?" She said, "God, please, I understand this is your mission. Will you consider this?" She came humbly. She went lower still. She didn't mind being referred to as a dog or being categorized in that way because she knew who she was before God. Who do you think you are before God? If he called you a name like that, is he not within his right to do that? How would you respond? And now each point is going to get progressively shorter, and that was my longest one. So we're going to move on to the next one. Jesus didn't often spell out the truth for people. Jesus didn't often spell out the truth for people. So you'll notice he didn't just tell her plainly, "Hey, care about you a lot, but God's called me to only minister to the Israelites, and the time for the Gentiles hasn't come yet. Like, I'm really sorry." He didn't say that. Tim Mackey from the Bible Project calls his response to her a mini parable, and I think that's super cute. So a mini parable when he says, it's not right to give to the dogs what belongs to the children, this mini parable. And so what was God doing when he responded to her? Well, Jesus, God, same person. What was Jesus doing when he responded to her with this mini parable? In Mark 4, the disciples have some questions about why he uses parables, and this is what he says. When Jesus was alone, the 12 and the others around him asked about the parables, and he told them, "The secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to those on the outside, everything is said in parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise, they might turn and be forgiven." Which again is like, what? Jesus, I thought that you wanted people to understand. I thought that you came to save the world, not to condemn it. What happened to John 3:16? I thought you wanted people to turn and be forgiven. What do you mean that you're telling people parables so that they won't understand? So I am going to quickly tell you a parable and hope that you don't understand it. Just kidding. I hope you do. Okay, so I got this from Rhett, who got this from Sirac, who maybe got this from someone else. We don't know where this comes from, but credit where credit's due. Okay, so there's a hiker, and he is a real type A kind of guy, okay? Think like ex-military, he's like on mission, trying to get where he's going. And so he's climbing this mountain to see a sunset, and he needs to be there by a particular time. Okay, and so he's on his way up this mountain, and lo and behold, there's a rock in his boot. And he is focused, tunnel vision, and he's just trying to get up the mountain because he's already running behind schedule. Okay, so he's just going to leave the rock in his boot. It's hard to take off those boots and like your sock, and there's all sorts of stuff. He'd have to sit and waste a lot of time. So he's hiking up this mountain, and when you have a pebble in your shoe, how difficult it is to think about anything other than the pebble in your shoe. Just every step is a little reminder that you are in pain. No? Yes. Finally gets to the top of the mountain, okay? But really, before he can even enjoy the sunset, ironically, he's got to take the pebble out of his shoe, and in a rage, he thinks, "I'm going to throw this pebble off this mountain because I'm so mad at it for making my enjoyable walk not so enjoyable." And then he has a moment of, he's a little sentimental ex-Marine, and he decides to keep the rock. He's going to put it in his pocket because it was his only companion up this mountain. So he puts it in his pocket. And he grows weirdly fond of the pebble. Over the years, It's a reminder of this beautiful moment that he got to experience at the sunset and this thing that he got to accomplish. And so he just keeps it in his pocket. And over the years, as people are talking and his hands are in his pocket, he thumbs it over in his fingers and he takes it out occasionally just to look at it. And over the years, the dirt and the rock of this pebble files down. And one day he looks and he realizes, oh, something's shining. So immediately he takes it to a jeweler and they clean it off and they use all of the equipment and they reveal to him that in fact all along this little pebble was a super rare diamond. And he realizes in that moment, I'm never throwing this away. I am never going to sell it or trade it in. This thing is so valuable to me, not just because of its value, but because of what it means to me. Okay? So that was a parable about parables. Okay? Parables are these little pebbles, and they get stuck in our shoe. And when we're feeling comfortable, that thing makes us, wait, what? And as we mull it over, we realize its value. Okay? So Jesus wasn't quick to tell people what to think. He didn't want to think for them. He wanted them to think for themselves, and he invited them to do so. Why did he do this? I think if you spend any time around teenagers, you know that this is true. You can't just extract wisdom from your brain and place it into someone else's. It doesn't work. You could tell them 50 times over and over again, 50 times in one day, why something that they're doing is a bad idea. And it's like, they're like, yeah, got it. I got it. Okay? I think he knew that about people. People grow into wisdom. They grow in a knowledge of the truth. You have to be patient and steadfast in leading people to the truth. Jesus knew this. And we can intuit this, can't we? Most of us, when asked to share a deep truth that the Lord has taught us, one that's become foundational to the way that we think and live, we're not going to answer, oh, I heard this really great sermon where the preacher spelled it out super clear for me. The truths of God that have become a part of us and worked their way into our very being have become a part of us over time and a myriad of experiences. We've found those things to be true. Jesus said, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all of your hearts. And then in John 18, everyone on the side of truth hears my voice. And you know who heard his voice was this desperate mom. Notice that she calls him both Lord and Master, and she was an outsider. So how did she know who he was? In this interaction, we see him engaging her mind with this mini parable, albeit even testing her knowledge in some ways. But by engaging her like an equal, an intellectual equal, and I won't get on a rant here about what this means for women, but it's a big deal that Jesus would hold women in this regard. He engages her mind. Her response to him, most scholars, I think, would agree. You can go check that. But a lot of scholars at least say that in her response, she is referencing a story from 1 Kings chapter 17, where Elijah, a Jew, basically has this interaction with a widowed mother who is desperate for her child, and they're starving, and they share a meal, and God takes care of them both. And so in her response, in saying, well, even the dogs get the crumbs from the children's table, she's referencing this thing that happened. She knew her scriptures. Also, something neat is that 1 Kings 17 reference with Elijah, 1,000 years before this, however long, I don't know, long time before this, happened in the same region, the very same spot in the region of Tyre. So she knew her scriptures far better than any of us probably do. And because of that, she was confident in being able to spar with him. She knew that the crumbs were for her too, and now. So, some practicals. Is there someone in your life who you keep telling them the truth over and over and over again and they just seem to never get it? Maybe it's because you keep trying to spell it out plainly. Rather, be like Jesus. Be creative. Invite them to seek the truth. And as you do this, the truth will seep its way even further into you. It'll take root in the deepest parts of who you are. Don't be intellectually lazy. Don't be creatively lazy with your words. I almost quoted Dumbledore, when he says, words are our most inexhaustible form of magic. Words are powerful. Words are powerful. God creates the entire universe through his words. Your words matter. Don't be lazy with them. Be creative in the way that you speak to people. Don't be intellectually lazy. And we shouldn't be quick to tell people what to think, especially when our opinions are a mile wide and an inch deep. In our society, it's so important to have a stance on any given thing, to be opinionated, and to voice that opinion publicly. But I encourage you, be slow to speak and quick to listen, or at the very least, be like Jesus. Boldly outspoken about the kingdom and silent about everything else. Let your life and the way you interact with people show the world what you think about all those things that they hold the chief importance. The brightness of your light really does correlate to how well you love the people around you. And again, I want to highlight her response to him here. Gosh, I pray that we are as open to his engagement as she was. She was ready for him to engage in her mind, and that we take seriously our scriptures like she did so that we understand what he's referencing when he talks to us. She was a woman of great faith. And this last point is the shortest one, and that is that Jesus let people influence him sometimes. Sometimes. Jesus let people influence him sometimes. So we're going to go back to the map here. There we go. All right. So remember, he starts out on the left of the Sea of Galilee where all of the Jews are congregated. And then he's going to go up to the land of the Greeks. Okay, and now you're going to see him come back down onto the right side of the Sea of Galilee. After his interaction with her, he's going to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Who do you think lives over there? Greeks. Yes. Okay, let's listen to what happens next. So Jesus left there and went along to the Sea of Galilee, and great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled made well, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. And then he feeds them all with 7 loaves of bread and a few small fish. And the scripture goes on to say, the number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after Jesus sent the crowd away, he got into the boat and went back across the Sea of Galilee to the vicinity of the Magadan. So something happened to Jesus in his interaction with this desperate mom. He didn't think that his mission included the Gentiles yet. And after speaking with her, it's clear that the way he thought about his mission changed. Am I implying here some maybe scary things for us? Yeah. That maybe Jesus had truth revealed to him over time. That's what I'm implying. And that the Spirit used regular old people to enlighten Jesus. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I realize that this is a stretch for some of us. And before you start yelling at me about what I'm saying, I just want to invite you to do 2 things. The first one is to take a screenshot of these 2 podcasts. Just go listen to those. They're going to talk about this much more intelligently and with a lot longer amount of time. Go listen to those. Those are great. And 2, I want to ask you to consider that while Jesus was fully divine, he was 100% God, Philippians 2 tells us that he didn't hold on to his divinity. He didn't use it to his advantage. He came here to operate as a human man. Somebody taught Jesus how to use a spoon and potty trained him. Somebody taught him how to read and how to interpret the scriptures. Jesus was a learner. And for more on that, again, I'm going to suggest those 2 podcasts because there's just not time for today. But for now, I just want you to consider this text and that it's clear something about his interaction with her influenced his next move. Tim Mackey at the Bible Project, he calls her the hinge that opened up Jesus' ministry to the Gentiles. And don't we see this reflected in the Father? Consider what happened after God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, and then immediately they build a golden calf and start worshiping it. Do you remember this? And God's rightfully angry. He's furious with them, and he says, I'm going to wipe you off of the planet. And then in Exodus 32, Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. Lord, Moses said, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Did you catch that? Moses influenced God's next move. God allows people to influence him, to influence his decisions. We get to reason with God. And that's bizarre to me. It's utterly bizarre to me, but it's clear in Scripture that he delights in giving us some sway. Now, I think his end game is his and his alone. And I think that his promises, he's going to keep those promises. But I think that what happens in the interim, we have some say over that. So what? So some practicals here. If God isn't rigid and inflexible on all things, we shouldn't be either. And, she would have been the last person on earth who should have been able to influence Jesus' next move. She was an outsider, first of all, and she was, second of all, a woman. She should not have been able to influence Jesus' next move, and she's the one that the Father used. So who are the people in your life that you think you can't learn from? Who are the people that you discredit? You're not going to listen to that group. They wouldn't know anything. If you are desperate, I've been watching this TV show, okay, and I'm going to wrap up really soon. I've been watching this TV show, and there's this religious professor guy, and he's supposed to be super wise, and in some ways he is, but he said something it's been a pebble in my shoe for a while, and I don't know if it's going to turn out to be a diamond, but he said, God falls silent on us all. God falls silent on us all. And I find that oddly comforting, because we do all seem to have this experience, no? We want something, desire something desperately, and that desire is often rooted in love, which we know comes from God, and we get radio silence. Have we all had this experience? Maybe there's someone in your family, you're desperate that God intervene. Maybe it's your child, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's someone else, maybe it's a roommate. There are people in our lives we're desperate, God, would you intervene? And it just seems like we're getting nothing from him. If that's you today, listen to me closely. Now is not the time to grow weary and fall away. You are in a unique position to influence God. Your desperation permits you the boldness you might not otherwise have to ask him big things. And I encourage you, appeal to God's reason, appeal to God's heart, and do so with the utmost humility, without a hint of entitlement. Because remember, We're not coming to God saying, I'll follow you if you give me this. It's, I'm going to follow you regardless of what you give me. But God, please, you're the only one with the power. That's how you approach God in desperation. So to wrap up, let's be like Jesus, who wasn't primarily concerned with people's feelings, who didn't often spell out the truth for people plainly, and who allowed himself to be influenced by people sometimes.